Welcome to another Wisdom Pod with Piyush Mahapatra with us today. He's CIO at Open Medical. He's an NIA fellow and consultant trauma and orthopedic surgeon. We're going to talk about innovation, digital health, sustainability, and digital transformation today. This pod is brought to you by podpar.com. That's my podcasting company. If you want to scale, if you want to start, if you want to be invited to podcasts, you can go to podpar.com. We monetize podcasting the unconventional way. Piyush, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and about what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. So yeah, as mentioned, I wear a few hats. My original background was as a trauma and orthopedic surgeon. So I still have a significant amount of clinical practice. It's what I enjoy and what keeps me connected. But I think I was always motivated by problem solving and trying to solve those at scale. So that started a little bit earlier on, even during my training. I founded an education startup that taught non-surgical skills to surgeons, and grew that. At one point, we were training about 50% of all UK surgeons through that. So that's kind of when I got a little bit of a taste for growing and scaling problem-solving initiatives and solutions, and then really moved into the digital space about 6 or 7 years ago with Open Medical. Now I work as Chief Innovation Officer there, and really the focus is around patient flow and clinical pathway management, and trying to help solve that in health systems across the world. So UK has obviously been our primary focus, but now we're branching out, and I think most people recognize that healthcare is challenged everywhere. So trying to solve those problems at scale is something that kind of really drives and excites me.
Interesting. Well, okay. So first, how did you get into your surgeon career? And then why has entrepreneurship been part of your life since 2019?
Yeah, so I chose my surgical care. I guess I come from a medical family. So one of those kids that was always quite good at science and enjoyed it. So thought medicine was a sort of natural option. Interestingly, my family did try and discourage me. They, I think, recognized some of the challenges that future medical careers are going to come against, and some of the pressures being seen. But yeah, as I said, I really sort of enjoyed that aspect of learning. And then when I went through my training and sort of moving from medicine into surgery, it's sort of the same motivation. I think with trauma and orthopedics, there is often a very specific problem, and you have fantastic solutions. So if that's a broken bone, you go in, you can fix that. We have fantastic implants, fantastic techniques, and patients generally make a great recovery. Things like, same with hip and knee arthritis, patients are in agony, fantastic hip replacement. Actually, they might even go home that day, and in 6 weeks' time, you've transformed their lives. So that kind of immediate being able to fix that problem immediately was something that really drove me towards trauma and orthopedics. And I also enjoy technology, and I think there is a lot of technology within orthopedics in general. So, as I said, we have implants, we have robotics, and all of those programs. And so I've always had a natural affinity to those sort of areas, which again drove me towards that as a specialty. And then, yeah, the second half of that question was around entrepreneurship. And again, I think I'm just not very good at handling things that don't work very well. So if there's wastage or things aren't done optimally, I guess I've always had that drive to try and solve it and fix it. And ultimately, then you realize that you can do that at a local level, but in order for it to succeed at scale, there has to have some element of sustainability, and that and often that has to be financial to some extent. So again, entrepreneurship really drives that of how can you make what was an initial solution actually continue for years on end. And that's what's kind of naturally pulled me towards that. But I certainly didn't go out to say I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to found my own company or anything like that. It was very much a gradual kind of pull and doing things that I enjoyed.
And nowadays, what a day-to-day in your life looks like? How do you balance entrepreneurship with your current practice?
Yeah, again, it's busy, but I think it's, for me, it really adds a huge lot of value, and there's some significant synergies. Again, we're providing solutions to hospitals, so me going into hospital and working on the shop floor really, as I said, makes me feel connected to some of the problems we're trying to solve. I live them every day to some extent. The So yeah, my typical day, whether if it's in surgery, I'm there, do a long day, 12 hours, 4 or 5 hip or knee replacements. So, and again, it's a totally different type of work. You have a singular focus. A lot of people talk about flow states, and again, I think surgery and operating, you often achieve that. You by definition can't really do anything else, so you get that real clarity, and sometimes I see that as a little bit of a nice break, bizarre as it sounds. And again, you have that real sort of meaningful impact. And the other side is then the innovation and digital piece, where you're going and you're solving system problems. So from surgery, which is very much you're dealing with that one person and one patient in front of you, to the other polar opposite, where you're looking at a system level challenge. You might be trying to deploy a digital system over 5 or 6 different hospitals, affecting populations of millions. And how do you then architect that, deliver value to the clinicians, deliver value to the hospital owners, management systems, as well as eventually the patients, because ultimately, if you have a more efficient healthcare system, the patients are going to benefit at the end of all of that. So it really, my day-to-day is incredibly varied. It sort of spans the whole range, which I think is what really excites me, because as I mentioned, most healthcare systems do have their challenges, and I think for me, having that diversity really keeps me grounded and keeps me and gives me that perspective, so that some of those frustrations don't spill over or become all encompassing. And I think, I have to acknowledge that the NHS has some fantastic enablers to allow that to happen. So, for example, they run the Clinical Entrepreneur Scheme, which is for entrepreneurial clinicians to really go through a bit of an education and training program, give them some foundational skill sets to learn the skills to be able to do this sort of activity. And then now I've progressed, so I mentor on that program to sort of junior colleagues. But now I'm on the NHS Innovation Accelerator, so that's that fellow role where it's more about scaling solutions to national level. So again, there are systems and structures in place, even within a public healthcare system, to allow some of those entrepreneurial activities to occur and block out some time for me to be able to do that. So yeah, as I said, it's a nice mix. It's really varied, from operating on patients to presenting or solutions to system leaders, or architecting, or doing digital configurations, and to everything in between, really.
Right. And you mentioned that you do hip and shoulder replacement on a daily basis, right? Is that your specialty?
A hip and knee. Yeah.
Hip and knee. Who are your target customers? Is it old people that broke a hip or something, or is it athletes as well? Like, who's your core market?
No, absolutely. So I think, again, my practice, I have a split practice. So we deliver on the trauma service, which is absolutely patients who've fallen over and broken their hips, and that we provide as an emergency service. And again, that's a universal experience in a lot of NHS hospitals. The planned hip and knee replacements tends to be in older patients. That's the demographic that get hip and knee arthritis. Absolutely. Do you see them earlier? Yes. Another part of my practice is sort of soft tissue reconstructions around the knee. Again, and those are absolutely athletes, whether that be anterior cruciate ligament injuries or meniscal tears. So, and again, that sort of knee pathology in the younger patient group. But yeah, as I said, that is the sort of planned surgery part of my practice. So we do emergency and planned.
Right. Because there's a bunch of folks that get a hip replacement at older ages in society. It seems to me that people do not really take care of their health until it's too late. Why do you think society ignores health for that long? Is it because people are so focused on the present and avoid thinking about the future? Like, what have you seen as a practitioner when it comes to society and them not putting in enough importance on their health?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the one thing I would say about society is that, there's a huge range. And I think one of the things that's really coming to the forefront, again, the UK being a public health system, you get access and visibility to some of this, but healthcare inequalities is a huge issue. And that's really saying that there are lots of different social determinants to health. So I don't think it's the failing of the individual necessarily to not look after their health, but if they have significant financial concerns, they have to work 2 or 3 jobs, they're struggling to afford good food. Again, often eating healthy is expensive, and can so is it absolutely there are some behaviors, and people do prioritize the here and now, but the question to ask as well is, are there reasons why they have to prioritize the here and now, and they can't have that long-term thinking. And I think, as I said, what we're seeing is healthcare inequalities is a massive issue, and it's not just in what I do, but in things like cancer, for example. They may present to their doctor very late because actually they couldn't afford to take the time off work to go see someone, and they sort of sat on their symptoms, or they may not have access to those group of people, or the convenience to be able to travel to hospital. So there's a huge multitude of factors why these things happen. So I think it's about the broader perspective of how can we tackle some of those healthcare inequalities to really get people to think about their own health. And absolutely, there are some fantastic pockets of work, and depending on which country you're in, there's different organizational bodies that have priority for that, and whether that be your insurer, your employer, etc. So there's a huge range. In the UK, we're obviously very public health focused, being a public health system.
Right. So another part of your time, you're part of accelerators and various other programs. What are you seeing in terms of inefficiencies in your day-to-day practice that you're like, okay, I can come up with a better solution to that? What ideas do you have, and how, what would be your potential plan to implement some of these?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've sort of implemented quite a lot of the ideas. So at Open Medical now, we are in 150 NHS sites. We're in 3 different countries, and again, so the really interesting thing for me now is actually a lot of the problems that we thought were UK centric are actually fairly applicable in other countries as well, even with different healthcare systems. So I think globally we're seeing the same problems. You've got a increasing demographic shift with an older population. You've got workforce restrictions. There's just not enough healthcare staff or healthcare professionals, and increasing complexity. So now chronic disease is more of an issue. We have better treatments, but they're keeping people in a state of ill health for longer periods. So that again demands much more resource. So that is a global. Certain systems are obviously under pressure more than others based on context and funding, etc. But that's the backdrop. So a lot of what the challenges have been around fragmentation of care. So increasingly, care as I mentioned, is moving towards that chronic disease space. You need the interactions that you used to have with healthcare systems are often longitudinal rather than specific point events. And how do you manage that effectively without overburdening your workforce? So a lot of the digital solutions that have been deployed in the past, electronic patient records being probably the most well known, are very centered around, do I want to know everything about that individual in front of me? So I've got patient A in front of me, let me look at their history. So that will tell you everything that's happened to that patient in that one organization. So you're missing any treatments they've had in other organizations. You often have a huge amount of volume of information, not particularly stratified. Some of it may not be that relevant. So it doesn't really fit in or tie in with how you as a doctor would want to work. Well, what we've sort of created is a pathway management system. And again, there's an increasing recognition about the importance of the clinical pathway. So a clinical pathway is a patient journey. They come into the healthcare system, they traverse that. And again, that may go on for a long period of time. So how do you manage all those touch points effectively? And then how do you manage groups of patients? You might have, actually, I want to know, in my last 24 hours, I was on call, who are those patients that are now under my care? Here's the list of 10. What are their next steps and next actions in order to be able to deliver whatever emergency care they needed effectively? What's still outstanding? So again, that cohorting and streamlining of patients and their journeys, I think, is what we've really tried to focus on. We've moved everything to the cloud so that to try and solve the interoperability challenge. Again, care is increasingly be delivered by multiple organizations rather than a single entity. So having a joint up infrastructure is incredibly helpful to sort of manage that. So I think those are areas that we're really seeing significant development in. And the final thing is really around, I think there's a lot of noise and interest in the health space, quite rightly. What we're finding is the importance of clinically led innovations. I mean, we're not the only company. There are a few fantastic others out there. That the value of that clinical voice, the person who knows the problem deep down and lives it every day, really guides solution development. And I think that's what's been missing in the past. And we're seeing lots of clinicians now who have grown up in a different era, are very technologically literate and often have development or coding backgrounds, and can start developing and creating these solutions that are, again, highly optimized for the clinical users, which I think will help address some of the scale and adoption challenges that other solutions have struggled with in the past. So yeah, that's kind of the long version of where I think some of the opportunities arise.
What about prevention instead of fixing what's broken?
Absolutely. I think prevention is critical. For me, the key for prevention is, how do you make that a reality? And even in a public, so digital absolutely has a place. So we have a solution, for example, if you come in with a broken bone, we'll automatically notify the team around, this patient is not on bone protection, should they be on it, to prevent a secondary fracture. So that's in the secondary prevention space where it's almost happened. But the primary prevention of, how do you actually make sure that patient is on it at the first, when they needed to be, to prevent that first event. That is very hard. I think, again, some of the systems being created, things like the integrated care systems in England, in the UK, and accountable care and integrated systems abroad, are aiming to try and smooth out that traditional conflict where an investment in prevention didn't yield any benefits because the organization receiving the benefits was different to the organization spending the money, if that makes sense. Because if you're spending in prevention, the benefit is seen with the hospital having less cost. The problem with that is depending on where you are, the business fundamentals sometimes fall down. So if you're still running a fee-for-service model where the hospital is getting paid for the activity it's doing, they're not particularly incentivized to prevent cases from happening because they want more service to deliver on. Now, you'd think, again, the public sector would be better for that because clearly, in theory, it's one joined up entity where you put money into prevention. It means you spend less in delivering treatment. The way the NHS was configured in recent times was actually to create an internal market with competition between hospitals. And actually, you had exactly the same fragmentation problem where the hospital, the primary care or community side would say, look, if we spend this, you will have 100 less operations to do. But the hospital goes, well, if we have 100 fewer operations, we're not getting that budget allocated to us. So it's not in our interest to deliver that or help fund that. So it just ended up very messy. So the aim of the integrated care system is to try and streamline that. So there's a single governing body that says, we will invest in prevention. The challenge again is timescale. So often it's very hard to demonstrate a return on investment within a timescale that fits or works either with political timescales, which are often on 5-year cycles, or even sort of people's roles. People move on within 3, 4, 5 years, and they want to see or realize some benefits within their tenure. And they often, that long-term thinking is very hard to embed, which is why prevention often struggles. But absolutely, I think it's the right way to go. I think the problem we haven't yet solved is how do you actually deliver it effectively and sustainably in practice.
What kind of problems do you see other medical founders or medtech founders face in this current industry? As a mentor, what do you give them as advice, and what types of problems are they facing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a number of challenges. I think, again, if you speak to most entrepreneurs, once you've done it a little while, if you'd known everything that you know now, you probably wouldn't have started in the first place about how difficult it can be. So yes, it is a long journey. I would say make sure your motivation is right. People sometimes do entrepreneurial activity because they're frustrated with the status quo. That's not the right thing to do. Make sure it's something that you actually really believe in and want to. So that's number one. I think the challenge is establishing entry point. So the first 1 or 2 customers or clients is very difficult because everyone is looking for validation, proof that it works, and you end up in the chicken and egg scenario where no one wants to try it because you don't have any data. You don't have any data because no one wants to try it, etc. So try and focus on solving that initial entry. There's a well-known phrase about pilots. Again, try not to do free pilots if you can help it. They're significant. They're not as valued as highly. And then at some point, you need to have a good team. So if you are not technical yourself, bringing in a technical co-founder. I was very fortunate in that I went into sort of a big leadership team. So I was able to continue clinical practice, but often people find that the two can be a real challenge. So it's about thinking about the context that you're in, both personally, your motivations, what skill set you have, and then how you can supplement with people around you. And sort of be prepared for a long journey. Healthcare moves much slower. It's very naturally very risk averse. Sales cycles are much longer. So you just have to understand that. And a lot of that we've seen a couple of high profile failures recently that have gone for a different sort of blitz scaling approach. Raised huge amounts of money and again struggled because the system kind of resists that aggressive, fast change.
Right. What would be your top goals for next year?
So I think our top goals for next year is to establish some national rollouts of our digital solution. Again, I think that's highly likely to be able to influence how healthcare systems work at government and national level, particularly as some countries mature in their healthcare delivery. I think, sort of on the clinical side, well, I'm involved in a lot of digitization of our processes within the current hospital, rolling out some to effectively go paperless on all of our surgery. So that's the kind of big clinical area of work. I think we're aiming to bring in some robotics as well, so within the next 12 months. And then finally, sort of on a personal level, ideally, like we've set up a fantastic team now, so it's about trying to delegate and bring on the team to that next level of growth that will hopefully serve us for the next sort of 3 or 4 years.
What challenges do you expect to face?
Well, I think we're starting to operate in multiple jurisdictions, multiple countries. So the post-COVID era has meant at least some of the international kind of video relationship is accepted a bit more. I think navigating those regulatory issues within those new countries as well expect to be quite challenging. And simply, the main thing is, can we continue to scale at the velocity we have done while maintaining the experience and product offering that we have? And I'd like to think so. I think anyone in healthcare who says it's easy is probably slightly naive. So we fully understand that it's a long journey, but you have to be receptive to feedback and adapt and learn and be fairly resilient.
The usual. Where can people find out more about you, Piyush?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn, so drop me a line there. It's Piyush Mahapatra. Luckily, it's a relatively uncommon name, so fairly easy to find. I'm usually responsive. Again, if you just reference the podcast, that will be useful. Otherwise, you get a lot of messages. So that's probably the best way to get hold of me. Otherwise, you can check out our website at openmedical.co.uk, and my personal email is piyush@openmedical.co.uk.